Is this working? Oh, okay. So this is my first time speaking in person in 3 years, so please be gentle. I've been on a lot of Zooms during COVID. But yeah, I'm Josie. I'm a UX researcher at Capital One. I'm super excited to be here with you today. I'm going to be talking a bit about design and product development and how ethics kind of plays into that. Cool, so that's me. What is a UX researcher? Well, I talk to people like you and figure out how to make the products you use better. So I spend a lot of time kind of figuring out what people do and why they do it. And why is this relevant to you? Well, you're all studying, I've heard, to be either developers or data scientists, cybersecurity people. Maybe you're even going to become designers. I'm not biased at all. But you're going to be in a room one day. Maybe you've already been in that room doing a co-op at a company, an internship, etc. And there's going to be decisions being made about products that people are going to use. And I really want to make sure that when you're in that room, you kind of understand what the implications of that means and how products you're developing could potentially cause harm to people. So when your product has the potential to cause harm to the end user, any decision you make about that product is potentially an ethical one. Let's take social media apps, for example. So this might have been you on vacation with your family. I know it's been me. But originally, social media apps were made to foster community, to bring people together. However, we know social media apps can often divide people, cause a lot of hate and disagreement, and especially in people who are teens, when their brains are still developing, it can cause a lot of negative effects on that. So if you are working on a social media app and you have like a great mission, you need to be aware of all those kind of negative ramifications that building a social media app can have. Let's take another example. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah. Yep, you're right. So I'm not going to do too many open questions, but this is an autonomous vehicle. So they kind of look at the street and identify who's a person, who's a car, who's a building, etc. So if you're working in the self-driving car industry, you have an incredible responsibility to ensure your product doesn't cause harm. I have a lot of friends working in this space, and they tell me, like, this is an extremely difficult space to work in, because not only can your product potentially injure someone, it can also kill people, and we've seen that happen. And that's why we don't have autonomous vehicles out in the world that much. We do have kind of tests, and there's a few. We have Teslas, but fully autonomous vehicles are not out there and won't be out on the road for a while. There's kind of legal reasons for that, obviously, but also just there's an incredible amount of harm that can come from them. So you have to make sure you're going to build something that's really safe and not going to hurt people. Vance mentioned Clean Slate. That's the project I'm going to be touching on a bit today. Clean Slate was a project that I worked on as part of Code for Boston, and we were trying to help people who had criminal records get their records cleared. So in Massachusetts in 2018, the state passed a law that allowed people to apply to get their record cleared. And a lot of things happened in 2018. You might remember that weed was decriminalized. So a lot of our work was around helping people who did have marijuana convictions apply to get their records cleared, because that was a pretty common charge on your record. And you could apply to get your record cleared for a variety of reasons. One of them was if you were juvenile, so under 21, and another was if the crime you committed was not a crime anymore, so weed, for example. So in 2019, more than 30,000 people were potentially eligible to get their records cleared in Massachusetts. So that's a lot of people. However, only around 2,000 people petitioned, which means applied, to get their records cleared, and only 352 of those people successfully got their records cleared. So on Clean Slate, we were trying to answer what product could we help build to help increase the number of people to successfully get their record cleared in Massachusetts. Before I kind of get into what we did, I wanted to step back and really go over the full kind of product development process of how you go from having a problem you want to solve to a product that helps solve that problem. So you might have been working in a company or a co-op and are aware of this process, but for those who aren't, I'm just going to kind of do a high-level overview. And can everyone hear me all right? Yes, awesome. So the product development process encompasses all steps needed to take a product from concept to market availability. So there's lots of ways you can develop a product. You can be sitting in your dorm room and come up with a product idea and go try to make that. However, at a company or a nonprofit or anywhere you're trying to develop a product, there is a kind of process involved in coming up with it. And there's different ways to do it, but in general, you start kind of with a discovery period where you're looking at the problem space and figuring out what problems exist. Then you start to define what problem you're going to try to solve. Then you come up with a product idea and design to help solve that problem. So that's called ideating, coming up with an idea, prototyping that, so you have a design and a working prototype, and then you test that. So you go back to customers and see if they understand it. Finally, the last stage, you implement that product. So if you're going to be software engineers, this is where you would come in and actually build out that product and make sure it's ready for market. So some of the teams involved in this process in a kind of tech company or on a product team in any kind of company, you have the user experience team, which is what I'm on, and the researchers on that team, which is me, are really involved in that early stage of discovery and definition. Then the designers come in the next phase and come up with the prototype and start testing it. And then the engineering team comes in and really implements that idea. So there's lots of other teams involved in this process. There's analytics, data scientists, business, marketing, etc. But those are kind of the teams in charge of those phases. There's also someone called a product manager. You might have worked with one or have heard about a product manager, but they're kind of the conductor of the orchestra. So they work with the design team, the business, and the engineering team to really be kind of responsible for bringing that product to market from beginning to end. So the product manager can be a really fun job. You get to own this product and talk to all these different teams. However, it's also a really hard job because the engineering team is going to tell you it's too hard to build. The design team is going to say they need more time. The business is going to say this needs to cost less. So you're constantly kind of being told no and having to coordinate these different teams. But it can be a fun job. So I talked a bit about the user experience team. That's the team I'm on. And often people think of UX as really what something looks like. So maybe the color of a product, the fonts used in it, or just what it looks like. But user experience is actually all aspects of creating a product for an end user. So if you think about Amazon, you probably have all used Amazon at some point. It's not just kind of the app on your phone or on your computer. It's all aspects that you have an interaction point with Amazon as a company. So the UX of Amazon would be knowing Amazon exists in the first place as a place you can buy a product from, to maybe having it on your phone, looking up the product, selecting which one you want, then adding it to your cart, adding all your information, buying the product, ordering it, waiting for it to arrive. Maybe you get an email or an alert on your phone that it's going to be delivered, and then finally it comes to your door as a package. So all of those touch points are the user experience. So user experience research, I'm very thirsty, focuses on understanding the user behaviors, needs, and motivations, kind of through observation techniques and various research methods. So as a user experience researcher, I spend a lot of time talking to people, talking to customers, potential customers, et cetera, and really understanding kind of what people do, why they do it, and figure out kind of how they're motivated, and then try to build a product around what they need. So kind of high level, but UX research tries to answer the what and the why of what people do. So why have a UX team? Well, a lot of companies don't, but where I've worked, the design team really comes into play because you can develop a product that no one's seen before and people will probably buy it because you're kind of the first one doing it. However, as soon as you have competitors with similar products on the market, the way to compete against those competitors is to ensure your product is going to be really good and be used by people. So that's why companies have UX teams, is really to ensure the product is designed in order for people to both want to use it, be able to use it, and tell all their friends to use it too. It's also important that you develop a product that actually can be used and isn't just like a bad product and only exists because no one else has it. So what does this all have to do with ethics, which is the course you're in? I am not the expert on ethics. Vance and Mika are the ones who can teach you kind of all about that. But I have been in rooms where there are decisions being made, as I mentioned, that do have ethical ramifications. And as a designer, or if you're a developer, data scientist, et cetera, you have a legal, both a legal and an ethical responsibility to protect your customers from harm. So I'm going to kind of go over a little more in depth the full product development process and kind of explain what's involved in each stage and how ethical questions might come up in those stages. So that's going to be the second half of my talk. I'm going to have some more water. And there'll be a lot of time for questions at the end too. I know I'm speeding through this. So we begin in the discovery phase. So in this phase, you really want to figure out what this problem space looks like. So what are all the problems that exist in this space that you could attempt to solve? And you're going to be talking to a lot of customers in this space, and you're going to be figuring out, what do people need in this space? What are their pain points about this space? And finally, you're going to be looking at competitors as well and saying kind of what competitors exist in this space. Do they have a product that helps solve this need? Where are they kind of failing, where we could come build a product that's going to be better? So as a UX researcher, I spend a lot of time in this phase, again, talking to people. I do quantitative kind of research where I do surveys or A/B tests, trying to figure out what people do. I look at their behavioral data, so I can see kind of their interactions with our product and where they might be dropping off. I also do qualitative research that's answering more about the why of what they do. So that's where I talk to them directly. I have interviews with them, different types of studies to figure out, okay, I see what you're doing, but why are you doing it? There you go. So something you can do in the discovery phase is called building a journey map. So a journey map is a way of trying to kind of empathize with your end user and look at all the steps involved in the space they're in and how they would attempt to solve the problem they're trying to solve. So this is me and my project partner in a clean slate making a journey map to try to understand how people clear their records. So coming into clean slate. I didn't know too much about how to get your record cleared in Massachusetts. And so the best way to find out about what that process looks like is to talk to people who have a criminal record. So the ideal way to do that would be to interview them and really understand what that experience is like for them. However, it's extremely difficult to find people with criminal records who want to talk to you. So we had a lot of difficulty in recruiting people to talk to, and we were able to talk to about 2 people. I think in the future we'd do a lot more outreach. However, we didn't have a budget to compensate people for their time, so this is a very kind of big blocker for this project. But one thing we did was we talked to legal experts in the space, people working in the criminal justice reform space who knew a lot about what this space looked like. So we got information from them. We also just did our own research. So we read the documents and the things online we had access to. So this is what, it might be hard to see way up there, but this is what our journey map looked like for kind of mapping out the phases of what it looks like to clear your record in Massachusetts. So the first stage, we kind of had someone who they don't even know if they have a record or not. So it's really a discovery phase where they are figuring out, do I have a record? If I do, can I get it cleared? And what does that look like? In the next stage, that is called the petitioning stage, and that's where someone would take the steps to get their record cleared. And what that looks like in Massachusetts is you have to fill out a paper form and mail it to a courthouse. So it's a very old school method. It's not a digitized form, but that's how it works. And then the next phase, you go to court, you have a hearing, and you often need legal representation there. And finally, there's a decision. So you either successful in getting your record cleared or unsuccessful, and then you can repetition, but we didn't go into too much of the repetitioning. So we tried to map out kind of what all those steps looked like. We also wanted to really understand the emotions of what someone would be feeling at each of these stages, and kind of, get in their headspace of what that looked like to really empathize with their experience. So it's really important in this first discovery phase to conduct ethical research. So there's lots of rules of how to conduct research in an ethical way. One thing involves conducting it with representative users. So if we're talking to people who have records and trying to understand that space, it wouldn't be very valuable to go talk to people who don't have records because they wouldn't know too much about that experience. So it's important to talk to people who have had the experience you're trying to solve for. It's also important to obtain consent from participants. So you have to make sure they know that you're conducting research and you'd like to talk to them, and that all of their information is going to be kept anonymous and secure. While you're talking to people in a research study, you really want to avoid causing any emotional harm to them. So some of these topics you discuss with them, especially in the project we were working on, can cause trauma or harm in some way. So be very careful about how you're speaking to people. And finally, it's really important to compensate participants if you can. So when I conduct research at Capital One, we always compensate all of our participants for their time because they're providing value to you and you need to kind of do that in return. Cool. So in the discovery phase, you're kind of looking at the full space, looking at all the problems. And in this next stage, you're really defining what is the specific problem you want to solve. So this really involves, okay, which problem are we going to solve, and how do we know it's the right problem? So how are we going to kind of judge we're going to solve this one over this one? And finally, you kind of want to ask, what value will solving this problem have? So thinking about, is it really going to bring about the result you're hoping for? Something you can do in this phase is doing a SWOT analysis. So this is kind of analyzing the market and looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that exist in this space, and that can help you kind of make a decision about what product would be best to build. For Clean Slate, we, again, had our journey map of all the phases, and kind of, we knew there were problems that existed in each phase that we could try to help with, but we decided to really focus on the first two phases. That was about kind of discovery, so education about clearing your record, and then petitioning to get your record cleared. Because the other phases are obviously important, but trying to help with legal representation, court hearings, et cetera, is a lot more difficult of a problem to solve. And so we really focused on how can we help people learn that they can get their record cleared in the first place, and then how do we help simplify that process for people. Cool. More water. So kind of the ethical decisions in this phase are deciding what the right need is. So this phase has a lot of decisions to make, and it's important to kind of know who's making these decisions. Is the business making the decisions about what you're going to build because they want to make the most money? Is it the tech team deciding what they're going to build because they want to build something that's the easiest to build? Is it the design team that wants to build something that's going to be like this beautiful user experience, but isn't that practical? It's really a lot of decisions involved. Also, it's important at this stage to think of kind of the end result. So how many people is building this product really going to help? And what kind of people? Is it going to be like the most number of people, or is it going to be a segment of people and not another segment of people? Also, you can think about what kind of need is this solving? Is it a really important need that people need to live their life, like clearing your record can help you get a job, housing, etc.? Or is it kind of a nice to have need that you're solving for? Also, going back to harm, is this product going to cause any harm to the people using it? So is the way we're going to build this or design this going to be causing harm? And kind of on the other side of that, if people can't access this product in the way we build it, is that going to cause harm? So for instance, if you price a product in a specific way, is that going to prevent people who could benefit from it from using it and helping them? Okay, so you've kind of discovered the problem space, you've defined the specific problem you want to solve, and now you get to start designing the product. So this is my favorite phase, but I'm a designer. So you kind of come up with what product you're going to make, you prototype it, and then you go back to customers and test it. In this phase, you want to ask, what's the best way to design this product? Which features should be in the product, and kind of how do we know when we have enough or too many? And finally, when testing the product, do users understand what we're designing? So it's really important when you're designing a product that people can actually use it. If you're just designing it in a vacuum and not getting any feedback on the design, it might not be very useful when you actually build it out. So I don't know, you probably can't see that form from there, but that is the petitioning form to apply to get a marijuana charge expunged in Massachusetts. And expunged is basically just another way to say cleared. So there's two types of kind of clearing of your record in Massachusetts. There's sealing your record, where someone can't access it, but it still exists for someone to find. And then there's expunging, where it permanently gets deleted from your record. So no one can see that you've committed a crime. So we were looking at both sealing and expunging, but this is kind of the paper form. So someone would have to fill out this form, mail it to the courthouse to apply to get their record cleared. And so we decided we would build an online form that both helped people understand if they were eligible to get their record cleared. So there'd be kind of a series of questions we'd ask, and by their answer, we could tell them, okay, you're eligible. and then we'd have questions that were on the form that they would go through, and it would fill out that paper form, and they'd be able to print it and mail it to the courthouse. And by having it online and by being able to kind of break up the form in an online digital format, we were able to really simplify it, kind of provide explanations for different language and what different terms meant to really help with that process. So imagine if someone kind of didn't have anyone helping them fill out this form, they really might not know what they need to put on it and if they're even eligible in the first place. So in this phase, we kind of took the form, we chunked it into different parts, we tried to rearrange it and come up with a prototype of what the form would look like. So this is kind of a silly mock-up, but it was a very simple form that we came up with. It basically just asked a series of questions. We had a progress bar to help people understand how they were going through the form, and it was just yes, no, I don't know answers to the questions. So your product doesn't have to be something super complicated. For this, we wanted it really to be as simple as possible. So in terms of designing in an ethical way, part of that design process is making sure you're testing it back with the people who are going to be using that product. So at this phase, you really want to ask, have we tested our design enough to ensure it's usable? Have we tested it enough to ensure it's understandable by people? Also, have we successfully designed it in a way that helps solve the original need we're solving for? And how are we kind of going to determine that? Finally, have we designed the product in a way that forces the user to do something that might not be in their best interest? So I think Mika might have gone over dark patterns with you, but there's something in design called designing with dark patterns. And first, there's a way to design, there's kind of two ways to design in a bad way. So I'll go over the first way, which is called an anti-pattern. And that's when you just kind of design in a lazy way. You're not really paying attention to, you might not be testing it. It's not very intentionally designed. So you might be causing people to do stuff that isn't good, but there's no kind of malintention behind that. On the other hand, there are dark patterns, which are very considered, well-designed patterns to make someone do something that might not be in their best interest. And this is both intentional and can cause harm. So you've probably experienced a lot of dark patterns out and about in the world. One of these is on booking.com. They have a lot of noise everywhere telling you, okay, you have to act now because there's hundreds of other people looking at this thing you're looking at. They also say, okay, this is in high demand or only available for the next hour. So I've been on the site and it's a stressful experience for me. But this is an intentional choice that this company and that designers are making in putting this around to try to get you to book this room. And it might be more subtle. Designers might be pushing back, saying, okay, we shouldn't be doing this. But at the end of the day, this is the product that the end user is using. Probably people notice this too. If you've booked anything on Airbnb, they also have very dark patterns. So Airbnb has a great design team. They're known for having amazing designers. However, the experience of Airbnb has a lot of dark patterns. So when you're looking at places on Airbnb, you just see the cost per night, and it's only when you click into that specific accommodation that you see the full breakdown of all the fees associated with it. So there's a cleaning fee, service fee, taxes, etc. So the final result can be much, much more than you originally thought. And so it's not kind of hiding the final amount, that would be illegal, but it is a dark pattern because they're kind of hiding this information and then telling you once you're already kind of getting ready to get this property. So in design, we call this going to the dark side. So please don't do this. Okay, we're finally at the final stage of this product development process. We're ready to implement the product that we've designed. So if you're going to become software engineers, this is your time to shine. In this phase, you really want to ask, okay, is our product working? Is it ready to go out into the world? And is it ready to scale? So are we going to be putting this product out kind of in phases, like having a minimum viable product and then making it work for more people? Or are we just going to put it out all at once? Finally, are we ready to market this product? So is it kind of ready to go out and be marketed and bought? Also, how are we measuring if our product is successful? So you kind of want to define this earlier on almost in the first phase, because if you don't have a way to measure if your product's going to actually solve the need you're setting out to solve, there's no way to really tell if it's successful. So you really want to think about how you're measuring that, and that could be revenue, engagement, net benefit of people having a better life. It could be a lot of different metrics, but you want to make sure you have a way to measure it. So for Clean Slate, we had our final kind of form. We developed it on a stack called DocAssemble, which is a really simple coding stack. And again, it was just a form, simple. We had a first page, which is what you can see here, where we just outlined kind of how long you could expect to take to go through the form, what you'd need before filling out the form, so any personal information or social security number, et cetera, that you'd need later. And then we also explained that we wouldn't store any information about the people putting information into the form unless we told you explicitly, you'll have to put in personal information. So we wanted to make sure they felt their privacy was protected. And this is a prototype, so it's not live. This project is still ongoing, so if you want to go help out, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But one problem with this product is that someone can go through the form, they can see if they're eligible, and then they can fill out the information. But a lot of people who have criminal records don't have access both to phones, computers, or to printers, which they would need to print out the form. So in the future, once we have a working product, we'd want to do a lot of outreach to try to get people to have access to this form. So one potential solution is to do that at libraries where they have printers and people can print the form there. But that was, again, another blocker in this project. And that often happens when you're working with a nonprofit where there isn't a lot of funding and you're all volunteering your time. So this is the final form. So all the questions you answer in our form gets put into the final form that you print out and is sent to the courthouse. Cool. So at this final stage, it's really important that you're protecting the user that's going to be using your product. So that involves any data that goes into that product that someone's inputting by using with it. You want to make sure you're being both legal with their data and responsible with it. So there's a lot of laws about user data. They differ from country to country. So the UK has different privacy laws than we have in the US, but that's a lot of the time when you're on a site and there's that little banner that's like, is it okay if we use your cookies? And you check it without reading it. That is allowing them to use all of the data when you're on their site. So that might be something legal they're doing, but you don't know if they're actually being responsible with that data. Another consideration is if you're marketing the product in a way that won't coerce people. So ensuring the way you're telling people about the product is kind of in a respectable way and really is saying that kind of isn't exaggerating what the product's going to do. Finally, kind of when you're building the product, you want to make sure you're doing that in a way where everyone can use it. So that's kind of where accessibility comes into play. That accessibility in design is really important when you're designing it. designing the product, but especially in the building phase, there's both laws to do with accessibility, where you have to follow certain ways you're building the product in an accessible way, but often those are very kind of gray. It's not always clear what specific way to build a product. So it's also important you're being responsible and ensuring just that everyone can use the product no matter what disability or other thing that people have. Cool, so I think we've gone from start to finish, from having an idea to finally a solution that's going to help solve that original problem. And again, I just want to make sure that now, hopefully you have a bit of a better idea of what it looks like to build a product, and also kind of the decisions involved in that, so that when you're in kind of your future job, maybe you've already been in that room, you kind of know what's involved in that process, and you're kind of armed with the information you need to speak up. So often it can be hard to speak up. I've been in situations where I'm not comfortable with what we're designing, and that can look a lot of different ways. You can try to persuade the business to go in a different direction, or sometimes it results in having to quit your job. So we've seen this at Google, Apple, other companies, where people have felt they aren't designing or building in an ethical way. So hopefully it doesn't get to that point in the job you're in, and you can kind of speak up before that happens to make sure you're building products that aren't going to cause harm. Cool, so last point, we're hiring. So if anyone's interested at working at Capital One, talk to me after. Also check out Code for Boston. So there's a lot of really cool projects going on there, not just Clean Slate, but other projects where you can volunteer your time and really work on projects that are going to help people in Massachusetts. So thank you to Vance and Mika for having me, and everyone else who helped with this presentation. Oh, that's supposed to say questions, but thanks for your time. Yes. Here you go.
Hello, hi, great. So I guess my question is, like, when you're in that phase of like finding potential users to talk to and or like test your product with, what does the actual process of like finding people look like? Because it's very nebulous to say, oh, we find potential users and then we talk to them or show them the prototype or whatnot, but like, do you go out on the street? Do you like, where do you find people? How do you get information on like potential users? And then what's the setting in which you like do this user testing? What does that look like logistically?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's everything I do. So I could talk for like hours about that. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can go out and find customers. It also depends like what you're working on and where you're working. So when I was a design student, and I was working on products, we would just go talk to all the students in our class and interview them, and then send out like messages on Facebook to try to reach people. That's not like really doing your due diligence, but that's kind of what our constraints were. At Capital One, we can talk, we have like thousands and thousands of customers, but there's also lots of red tape to just like cold reaching out to people. So we have a lot of policies in place to protect our customers, and it's very difficult to reach a lot of them to talk to. But there's a variety of online platforms. So one we use a lot is called usertesting.com, and that is where people sign up and just take, they basically can be interviewed, or they can look at prototypes and give feedback, and they get compensated for their time. So a lot of companies use tools like that to find participants. And the way you find the participants you want to is you have a screener. So I would just write up like screener with multiple choice questions to see if they fit the criteria of the people I want to talk to. And then if they pass the screener, then they can take the test that I've set out. But again, in some spaces, it's really difficult to find who you want to talk to. So clean slate was very difficult. If you're doing research like with children, that could be very difficult. So yeah, but I can go on and on about research methods.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want the mic or? Okay.
When we're discussing ethical design and all stages of the design process, is there ever an impetus for, I guess, bring those in discussion? It's kind of like for me as a CS person, on the engineering side, there's a big impulse response saying, "Oh, I just want to hop in and start building this out." So how do you really enforce and communicate the importance of these discussions, and how do you advocate them when maybe those aren't the top priorities?
Oh, that's a good question. I would challenge that because I think even as a developer engineer, like there's a lot of ethical questions. I mean, I'm not one, but that I would have, you know, in terms of like, are we building something that's gonna then go like work on its own and hurt a lot of people? So even once you get, you know, you're like, oh, I just want to start building this, like I would take a step back and be like, okay, is this gonna hurt people? Like if I'm building an autonomous vehicle, like, you know, I'm gonna be at fault there. But that's a good point in, that is a difficulty of being a designer, where often companies just want to start building things. And often they have about like 10 times more software developers than designers. So they invest in people who can build things and not design. So you have to constantly advocate for the value of the design process, the value of doing research, and kind of what I explained today about like when we have a product, it needs to be competitive out in market and people need to be able to use it. That's like literally I say that all day, every day to like my VPs and stakeholders, saying like, we have to do research because if someone can't use this product, like we're not gonna get any revenue. Because often those like don't compute. So did that answer it?
So this is, wow. So this is a, I guess, question on dark patterns. More specifically, how do you, when you have a service that has multiple different types of users, like for Airbnb, it's a marketplace between renters and people with property holders, how do you manage the, I guess, competing interests and make sure that a dark pattern for one group it's not a dark pattern for the other? So I guess an explanation would be, if Airbnb did show cleaning fees, everything else, then that could be a impetus for property holders to just eat the cost instead of just having that preventive measure.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that's something that comes up a lot. I think the difference is that the first, so not being transparent to your user, that would be a dark pattern. Causing, you know, someone to not choose a property because of all the fees, yeah, that can have negative effects on the property owner, but it's not kind of being coercive or manipulative in any way. So I wouldn't call that a dark pattern. However, that's a really important consideration when you have like different types of users. So you, like Etsy, for example, you have people buying products and then you have the stores and the creators of the products. And often it's difficult to know who are we actually trying to optimize here and like who are we trying to help. So you're trying to help both parties, but in the way you design the product, there are decisions you have to make about, okay, in this situation, we're going to actually favor the people who are buying the product. And in this situation, we're going to design it in an easier way for the seller to have a good experience. So you do have to make those choices. And often that comes from the business. So they might be just like, we aren't only gonna design for the buyers, for instance. But does that make sense, how one is more manipulative and one's more just like not ideal for them, but it's not kind of like misleading them in any way? Okay, I think you can ask a follow-up if you want. Sorry,
So
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
oh, it's fine. So just to like really make sure, it's usually just the focus of the company that it's really different between the focus of the company can, I guess, birth a dark pattern, while if it's just on the fringes of like, I don't really care about this, they're auxiliary, it's more of an anti-pattern if things are going wrong.
I wouldn't call it, it's more just like a dark pattern would be intentionally trying to conceal information. So for Airbnb, they're intentionally designing it in a way to get you onto the next page. So even though it could adversely affect the homeowner by having all those fees on the front page, it's not manipulating the homeowners as the user, if that makes sense. So it might have a negative effect on them, but as a business, you have to make that decision. Like, so they're making the decision. They don't want that negative effect. They just want to prioritize someone renting that property.
Thank you, that makes sense, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm also UX designer, and
Oh, awesome.
I think working on sort of dark patterns is often a really complicated situation. But at what point does something like sort of Airbnb or Amazon e-commerce practice of hiding fees till the end? A lot of people sort of know about how that works now and sort of work it into their purchasing process. At what point does the dark pattern no longer function as a dark pattern like that?
That's a good question. It's still a dark pattern. I think it's just people are so aware of it now that like we just like accept it. But that doesn't mean it's okay to do that. I think that's just kind of like living with the design that's out there, and we're just like conditioned to it. But I think it's a good point where like it's not always clear what is a dark pattern. Like they're very, very subtle. So for instance, like a pop-up, you know, is like the marketing team saying, hey, we want you to sign up for our newsletter. So like put your email in, and like that, the marketing team, like that's how they make money, and they get bonuses at the end of the year. So like it's in their interest to do that. It's, you know, annoying as a user, and it's annoying to like, you can exit out, and often that's hidden though. So that would be a dark pattern where like the user can't figure out how to X out of the pop-up, and so like you put your email in. But it's not always clear like that is a very bad thing, because there's a reason that's happening, and the business, you know, wants your email address. So often it's not always clear as a designer like how much to push back, because some things make sense from a business standpoint. But that doesn't mean they're good.
I suppose this is just kind of an opinion question, like what you think is the best approach, but how do we get companies to prioritize the ethical treatment of consumers in a system where they're not rewarded for that? They're rewarded for whatever increases profits. Like, do we crack down and create more legal restrictions? Because that has a lot of like methodological issues. Or do you think that the onus is on the workers to kind of require ethical design of their companies? Or how do we best go about ensuring the safety of consumers when there's nothing really in place to motivate companies to do that themselves?
That's deep. I don't know if I can answer that. But it is unfortunate that often, yeah, it's you often against the company, and often, they're paying you, so you have to, you don't want to lose your job. It should really be the company who has good ethics and good morals and is going to say, okay, let's do the right thing, because, even if it might harm our profits, like on the short term, over time, we should get people to like understand, what our values are and really value that. So some companies do have that approach, like Patagonia, for instance, where they kind of put values first, and hope that people see that. But yeah, unfortunately, companies aren't incentivized to always design in an ethical way. I think, yeah, laws are often going to be useful. It's hard for those to like actually get enacted, but definitely in the accessibility space, they are super helpful because companies don't want to get sued if their product isn't accessible. But yeah, I have to think about that a little more.
Great. Hi, Josephine. Thanks for the great talk. I was curious if you're willing to share more of your experience, like in the professional world, when you raise ethical concerns or questions. You had said that sometimes it can be uncomfortable because of the power dynamics. But I'm just curious, as someone who's an outsider, who's an academic, like, what is it like inside in terms of are people receptive to thinking about ethics?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I wish I included more of that in my talk, but unfortunately, I can't talk about my current workplace. But I can talk about past experience. So I worked at the Harvard Business Review before joining Capital One. It's an online publication to help people be better managers. So a lot of content around being a business professional. And when you work for a publication that's online, almost all publications make it very difficult for you to cancel your subscription. So you might have experienced this with publications that you pay for. But this is a problem that came up a lot where we actually had the capability for someone online to purchase a subscription. And this was an outside vendor that was kind of allowing us to have this on our site. And they also had the capability to cancel memberships, but we decided to not have that as an option. So, this is something I totally was not on board with, but unfortunately, almost no online publications actually allow you to cancel on their site. You have to call in to customer service to do that. And now, there might be some other reasons, like often your membership can be a little complicated and you need to talk to someone, but when a company actually decides to not offer something to the user that like is available, it is questionable, but it makes sense from a business standpoint. You don't want people to cancel, but I tried to make the case that like, okay, if we make this just super frustrating and you have to call in to customer service and you make it really difficult, people are gonna, at the end of the day, have a really bad experience and they're not gonna come resubscribe ever because they're gonna have like a bad taste in their mouth. So, if you make it an easier experience, hopefully like you have that customer's loyalty and they might come back. I did not win that one, but that is like a specific experience where sometimes you just like can't win some battles.
Quick question. Do ethical design patterns, things that you sort of develop to have a positive impact on your users, do those ever get turned around and become dark patterns in a Frankenstein's monster kind of situation?
Oh gosh, I hope not, but I'm sure that's a possibility. I'm trying to think. Yeah, fortunately, like in my past roles, I've had a lot of control over the process. So where you have less control is when stakeholders, business, marketing, et cetera, all want like a piece of the design and are like, no, can't do that, can't do that. We need an ad here, we need a sign up modal here, blah, blah, blah. So once you're like past that point and you like know what it's gonna look like when it's built out. So it doesn't often turn into something else after. So yeah, in that kind of design phase, you kind of understand what you're dealing with, and that's really where those like decisions come into play. I'm trying to think if like sometimes I check out like HBR and like see if anything happened to the pages I designed, but they're still looking okay. Yeah, but that's definitely possible. I mean, often going from design to development, like it's not going to look the way you designed it. So, it's going to be coded in a way where you can't always do everything you designed, and it might look different. But hopefully it doesn't start incorporating dark patterns unless a developer like wants to mess with you. This is a pretty cool venue. It's like a church. It's appropriate for ethics.
I know you talked about designing for all users and accessibility, and I'm wondering, what are some examples of like designing for people who are, let's say, like blind or deaf, and coding to make sure that your product can work if they just can't see or can't read or write or something like that?
Yeah, there's a whole role of just being an accessibility expert at a company. I am not that role, but like there's a lot of things. So both as a designer, you have to kind of understand accessibility patterns. So there's certain patterns you actually have to follow. So for like color contrast and like the size of typography, for instance, there's certain rules you have to follow to ensure people who might be hard of eyesight like can see the text. You have to be able to enlarge the text, for instance. If you are a blind user, you have to code like let's say an online website in a way where they can use like their keyboard to figure out what things say on the site, so they can be able to navigate the website. So both in the design phase, you have to design it in a way that's accessible, and then when you're building out the product, you also have to follow several guidelines. And I'm more on the research side, so I'm not as involved in that, but like as a developer, you have to be trained in accessibility, or you have someone who like comes in and in the process, you have an actual accessibility review where the product goes through that, and you have to ensure it follows all those rules. But something a lot of companies don't do, but would be great, is actually testing with people with different disabilities to ensure the products are accessible. So often it's more of like a checkbox, like, okay, we've like followed all the rules, let's just like say we did it. But a lot of designers are trying to get the actual testing phase before it's built out with people with different disabilities to help ensure they're accessible. Anyone else?
I'd like to ask a question. So in my section, one of the concepts we've talked about is techno-solutionism, and we've done some reading on that idea. And so just in a nutshell, it's the idea that you've got some problem, and your first idea, and perhaps your only idea, is let me design some app or some other sort of technological way of trying to solve a problem. But usually it's in a system where you can't solve it that way, right? It's more complicated, or maybe the technical piece is only a small piece of what you need as part of the comprehensive solution. So I'm just wondering if you've had experiences as a designer where you thought people are trying to solve this problem in the wrong way. Because we have the tools and therefore we think those are the only tools that you need, but actually you need other tools.
Yeah, that's a hard question. So I mostly work in the digital space, so I don't work on physical products. And I remember in, again, design school, like the solution to everything was always an app because it was like the easiest thing to make. But obviously that's not always the best way to solve a problem. I'm trying to think of like a specific example. But yeah, often like solving an actual problem can involve lots of different angles. So how you're marketing the product, like how you're doing outreach for people to hear about the product. It could be not just a tech, like a digital product, it could be like multiple different touch points. So it could be like, you know, like your Apple Watch has notifications and that goes to your phone and that has other things. So I think, yeah, it's not always, the solution to everything isn't always an app. Yeah, I'm blanking on a specific example, sorry.
Okay, so Mika and I are going to take a minute and set up the snacks back here at the table. So please talk with each other and with Josephine, and then come back and get some food.
Hello. Oh, cool. We are. Hold on.